All right, which brings us to Take Me Where I Ain't. Brett, you ready to take us through this one?
Yeah, Scott McMicken, one of two new projects that he's started up since he moved here to Asheville in 2021. Those who know Dr. Dog would probably know Scott McMicken's name. He's the one of two front guys, front players, singers, writers for Dr. Dog. Interesting notes on Scott. There was a new venue that opened up. It's this awesome place called Eulogy here in Asheville. Opened up by the brewery, Burial Brewery, a fun name for a venue for a brewery called Burial. And their very first show was one of Scott McMicken's newest projects called The Hypos, which he has put together with Greg Cartwright, which is really, it's just like this whole story is just fascinating to me and interesting. I mentioned it earlier about the Southeast and the music scene, and I hadn't really, I've always felt like Asheville has a tiny music scene. And yes, there's diversity here, and yes, there's definitely great music that comes out of here, but it's like it's a sliver, like it's a tiny sliver of what's going on in the world. And Scott McMicken moved to Asheville because of the diversity here, because of the music scene here. And that part, I was just like, what? Okay, now I need to pay attention differently. So he played at AVL Fest, and he played this entire album when it's happening. And the album was intended to be one long performance. So the way they recorded it in the studio is exactly that way. They started the album and they ran all the way through it with no stops, no breaks, no nothing. They did it not exactly, but they did it the way that they did it at the show at AVL Fest. And they played that entire album at AVL Fest as well. And he's got all kinds of really interesting tools and interesting things. Like definitely he's got buttons that he's pushing to make different sounds, but he had a tape deck and he hit play on the tape deck to start some of the sounds. So I love that he's using magnetic tape. The nostalgia of that is so cool to witness. And apparently he was doing some things where he was like slowing down the tape at different times when they were playing. So there's some cool stuff that he's experimenting with. He actually turned the shed in his backyard into the recording studio, and it's called Press On Records. And that's the name of his shed, is Press On Records. So just this cool freaking project here. He did an interview at AVL Fest also after he played that show, and I was just like, it's so endeared to him and to Asheville and to like what he's been able to do in that 10 by 16 shed in the backyard with an 8-track recorder. Like that's awesome, super inspired. His quote during that interview was that really stuck with me, is he said, "You literally can do anything in there." And I feel that way in my work with virtual reality. Like I can literally do so many cool things with people in the space of where they can stand. And I find that fascinating from a musical landscape to think about how much he's able to pack in, both like in the number of instruments that he's able to put in there. Plus this band, the entire ensemble is massive. The link that I sent you guys is of the 35 minutes into the live performance of When It's Happening. And you can see I think that there's 9 or 10 musicians in the ensemble. And I think that's phenomenal. Almost all of the musicians, including Scott, now that he's a local, are local to the 828. And he did that same thing in bringing the ensemble back for the live performance at AVL Fest. And I just think there's something really special about the way that he's approaching this project as an ode and a nod to why he's in the 828, why he comes to Asheville, and he's celebrating that through this project. His other two projects are interesting, and I love the way he distinguishes between what is Scott McMicken and the Ever Expanding versus what is Dr. Dog versus what is the Hypos, and the way that he's able to experiment in different ways. He actually called the Hypos a guinea pig for how he was putting together his studio. So he did a lot of experimentation there. And then When It's Happening came together, he had a lot more knowledge about how his shed and how Press On Records wanted to evolve with the music. So I think that's incredible. Just a note on the song, Scott sings, but he's only backup vocals here. I'm completely captivated with the vocal artistry on this one. And she sings in the video as well. I'm spacing out on her name, but I'll look it up by the time we're done and make a comment about that.
Alyse Baca.
Grant, you introduced me to Dr. Dog, and I don't think that we've had a Dr. Dog song yet on any of our episodes. But the way you introduced me to them, it was a text, and you said your new favorite band, and you sent me a link to Dr. Dog, and it definitely landed as my favorite band for a good 6 years. And then tracking them and getting closer and closer to the sound and the music, and then seeing them live, and then getting this from Scott McMicken. I'm like, yeah, this I want to be best friends with this guy.
I gave you your favorite band. You gave me my best friend, Jippy. So it all comes full circle. I love the regional connection of this too. And I didn't quite pick it up right away, but I did until you started talking about it. And I don't know if it's Alyse Baca, if I'm saying her first name.
Yeah, that's right.
And when I did a little research on her, because the opening of the song has this bass line build, and then it's just like this kind of draggy drum beat a bit, and the horns, it was just like this, it felt like pulling taffy away. It just felt like we're going to expand this out, and then it drives the ever expanding band name too. It just, those things were spinning in my head. But then to see this Asheville connection and what Western North Carolina has gone through, and to have you talk about the connection, Asheville has always felt like this hidden gem to me that I'm so lucky to have my brother and his family from there. I say it all the time, especially in light of the recent weather impacts that the region's had. It's made me pay attention a lot more. And out of the sadness of that, like you said, a lot of positivity, a lot of connection, selfishly, a ton of great musicians coming together. And beloved Asheville, I saw on Alyse Baca's Instagram, is where you pointed us to, like, where we can go donate and help the local community, and from a distance put some resources that we have into helping that area out. But there were also a ton of 3 in particular compilations that came out that were to benefit Asheville. And I'm like, okay, sign me up for paying for music that helps money go to people who need it. And there was one that Scott McMicken was on. I think we're all local stuff, the Resonance Sessions. I just found out about that one and just bought it, but I haven't listened to it yet. The other one were ATX Loves Asheville, which was in Austin, mostly Austin. And then the big one was Cardinals at the Window, which had the 100 songs on it that starts with War on Drugs and has MJ Linderman, has Angel Olsen from Asheville. I loved the idea that going through pain, the way we're going to do this together is going to be, music is going to bind us together to help everyone. And that to me speaks of Asheville, speaks of you and Diana and the community that you all have created, going through something rough and that community being tested. And this music feels like it brings that to life. I love the song title, Take Me Where I Ain't. And it took me a while to actually finish to listen to the full phrase of Take Me Where I Ain't So Low. But I always was saying, like, and it's been a relatively rough year for me too, not in the same ways, but take me somewhere else, get me out of here, take me where I ain't. Just felt like an expression that I've always known but never heard. And to see it delivered this way in a very smooth, I love her voice, super velvety and smooth, and then to these fun bass lines. Cool to see it full circle with Dr. Dog too, and to have people like Scott just want to create and collaborate. I love that spirit. So great tune.
Yeah, I enjoyed hearing the story and in the context of Asheville and the community coming together. And it's a reminder of how we live so much in our own worlds. Here's a community that was destroyed by an act of nature, and the national media moves on and they're covering like the next big news and the next big news. But here's a community that's still working through it. And just, I think how easy our attention is diverted to somewhere else while people continue to rebuild, and that process takes a long time. And so you really have to count on each other. You have to count on the local community to get you through. And the things that bring the local community together are worth their weight in gold. And it sounds like this kind of music, these kinds of festivals and the events that bring people together, they matter so much. Brett, I think it's grounding for me to have you bring it forward again. and to talk about it. I like how plugged into the community that you are. And I think that part's inspiring. It's also, I think for an artist, I think maybe not the best you can hope for, but certainly something that you hope for is that you touch people deeply that are in your community, people that have access to see you play live and see you play festivals and things like that. I hope that at some point the band will actually hear you talking about what it means to you to see them, because I think that stands out to me as something that's really powerful. And I hope somewhere, someday, the band gets that gift from you. And then I also really like your story around the shed and bending the tape and stuff like that. It just makes me think that sometimes we may think that if I just had better tools, if I had more time, if I had this or that, like wishing for what we lack is a thought track that we get on sometimes. But I like the way you talked about what they did, which is let's think creatively about what we have. We have this small shed in our backyard. We have old school tape deck. We have time. So what can we do with the things that we have? How can we think creatively about that? I think that part of the story also stands out to me as attractive and interesting as I think about the song. And the song itself is, I think, different in a lot of ways. Like the way the instruments come together at the start of the song, it sounds like they're even on different time signatures, and it sounds like they might even be wandering. It's four different threads that eventually come together and make a rope. They come in from different angles, and I like that. It's sounds a little bit chaotic at the top, but then by the time the vocals come in, the instruments have assimilated into what becomes the song. I think that's really unique. I can't think of other songs that had that type of buildup. And then, of course, I love the long outro as well. Made me want to consider putting it as the last song in the playlist just because it had this long fade out, things like that. But I liked it here and didn't want to, not that you bury it when you put it at the end, but I didn't want it to be lower in the playlist for some reason. So the song was great. And yeah, I just appreciate you telling us the story about where the song comes from in your life.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, and it's got a last song spot on the album. So I appreciate the desire to put it there. I definitely feel when I hear that outro, the baritone sax and the trumpet, that's the last sound I hear on the track. And when I think about funeral songs or ends of songs or anything like that, somber, deep, long-toned horns feel right to me. Being a horn guy, I'm definitely into that vibes. I'm glad you guys dug it, and I'm excited to see what Scott does next. I'll be following him very close.
Horn guy.
Well, you don't have to wait to see what Scott does next. We've got what Scott's done now. So this is Take Me Where I Ain't. Enjoy.